Hey guys, welcome to another video. We're going to continue on building our application. So in this video we will actually start coding, and the first thing you need is Node.js. If you don't already have Node.js, you can go to this website nodejs.org and install it for your own operating system. I'll be using macOS. So once we go to our terminal, we can see we're in this folder called weather app and the branch name is video02. Just another thing to note, if you want to follow along this video series, you can go to the link in the description and in GitHub and follow the branches that I'm showing here. Alright, so just so we can make sure that we have Node.js installed, you can run this command called node-v, and you can see I have 12.18.2. Your version may differ depending on the time that you watch this video. You should always download the latest version, obviously. Alright, so let's get started. What we will now use is a thing called npx. So npx is a package runner, so it basically grabs the latest version of Create React app for us and downloads it and runs it. So what we can do is use npx to download Create React app, and then we just want to create an application, right? So we'll name our application, we'll just call it test for now. You'll see why. And then we want to run it in TypeScript mode, so we'll also install TypeScript. Okay, so the Create React app has finished and it gave us all these commands that we can now use. But before we do that, I want to just open the folder in my Finder here. So we've got our final prototype images and then this test folder, which we created with Create React app. So what I'll do is grab all of these files, and except for the README, and move them out to the parent folder because I don't really want this internal folder for my application. So we can go ahead and delete that. So now we have the final prototype, the source, which is where our code will go, and the public folder, which all this is pre-generated from Create React app. So now what we can do, just to make sure everything works fine, is run yarn start. This will start a development server for us, and we can open any browser like Chrome and go to localhost 3000, which is the default port. Once that starts up here, it says compiled successfully, and as you can see, React is now running. What we're going to do next is open the same folder here in your favorite IDE. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code here. So I've got the same folder open, and we're going to do just a little bit of administrative items. So we'll update the CSS files to scss so we can make use of Sass, which we'll also learn here. All the TypeScript files are fine. And let's create a few folders here. As we saw, we need to create at least a few components. We have two pages in this application. One is the start page here with the home page. And we've also got this other page with all the weather details. So we at least need a folder for pages. And I like to create a folder for at least something called views. What views can be are, if you notice, there's a sidebar on this page and on this page. So that can be a view. You can also notice there's a view called this weather details. So that can be wrapped up in a view, but then this is a component and this is the same component, maybe just some flags to make it up or down. And maybe this is a component where the parameter is on the left and the number is on the right, so it's pretty consistent. So those are something called views, and we also have components, we have pages. Then we might also have something called APIs, so we need to call some APIs. And then we might also have something called stores, which are basically the application state. In the first video, you would have noticed there's something called context and state, so that's where all that code will go. And then maybe some static files like images, so we'll just call it static here. Alright, so I'm going to organize some of this a little bit. Actually, is move these app.test and app.css files into a folder called root, so that I'm not actually crowding up the main root folder here. So this is our root component, which goes in the index.tsx file. As you can see, React strict mode is on, and then we have the app component. So we probably need to update the import statement here. It's going to come from root now. Two pages, right? So we've got the home page and the content page. So what I'm going to do is create two folders in this pages folder, one for home and one for the content. So inside of the home, we'll create a home.tsx, and inside of that, we'll just export a new function, which will be our component. So it's just going to return, for now, just a div that says home. And we need to import React. And we'll do a similar pattern here inside of content, except it's just going to say content. All right, so inside of our app component, if you notice, we still have the old code. So we'll just go to the root folder, and go ahead and just delete all of this because we don't really need that anymore. What we're going to need is based on the route that the user is on. For example, if we have two routes on our page, one with a /home and one with the /weather. So we need to either load the content folder the content component or the home component based on the route. So how do we actually monitor those routes? So we're actually going to need a new package called React Router DOM. So we'll go ahead and add that with yarn. Okay, so once that is done, what we can actually do, instead of exporting a div or returning a div here, we can actually return a router. So if it doesn't import, we can just import it from here, router from React Router DOM. And inside of that, okay, this is just complaining about the types. So if you get those complaints, what you can do is yarn add types /React Router DOM. And this is going to be only for dev, so we don't really need the types in production. Okay, so once those are installed, your error should be gone. And this is complaining about a object called history. So for now, we'll just create a history here. And we'll use this function called create browser history, which is coming from the history package. And this one needs a history, so we'll just give it the object that we just created. And now comes the fun part. Inside of here, we can actually write a switch statement. And in the switch, we will just have some routes. So this is something called declarative routing. So what we can do is add a route, and inside of the route, we need a path. So for the path, we obviously will have a home path, which will be just /. And if it's just /, we want to display the home component. And similarly for weather, let's say we're going to add the content component. All right, so let's see what our results are. Let's go ahead and type in yarn start, and we should see some results. Okay, so it looks like we have an error. It says failed to compile, and we've actually got some problem with the scss file that we just created. And it says to import Sass files, you first need to install node Sass. So what that means is Sass is actually getting compiled down to CSS automatically by this package called node Sass. But we don't actually have the package node Sass. So what we need to do is cancel this process and add node Sass here. And we also don't need this one for production, so we'll add a dev flag here. And all the dev flag does is instead of putting your dependencies in the dependencies object, it's going to put it in the dev dependencies in your package.json. So all these items will not be included with your application because they are only needed for development purposes. So let's go ahead and start our project again. And everything compiles properly. We can see that our home text here, and if I go to weather, so why don't we see weather here? Well, let's go ahead and look at our code again. So if we open our app.tsx, this says route path / and then which opens the home component, and route / weather opens the content component. Everything seems fine, but the problem is that switch statement will get you the first path that matches. So one quick fix might be that you can put this at the top and put the / at the bottom so that this is the first one that matches. So let's see if that works. Great, so now it says content. The other fix that you can do for this one is keep it the way it is. Maybe you like the order that it's in and put this at the bottom, but you can make this one an exact path. So if you add the exact property, that means that only when it is exactly slash, it'll open home. Otherwise, it'll move on to the next switch state or next case. So it still says weather. If I reload, it says content. And if I go to slash, it says home. So next, what we can do is try to actually make the home component look like something on the home here. So we need at least a hello. So for this video, we'll try to accomplish this hello portion. So let's open the home component, and we obviously will need some CSS, so we can name it home.scss, and let's import that up here. And each component in React will take some props, right? So we can add the props here, and well, props in this case is going to be anything that you pass in, but we should actually try to make an interface for the props. So the interface will just be empty for now, but what you can do is type this and make it home props, so that anything that tries to implement the home component knows what exactly home needs. And here we are exporting just a div, which is fine, but we can just add a class name here, and the class will just be called home page. And if we open the home.scss here, what we can do is target that class with a .home page. And what are some of the qualities of this? Well, we know that home needs to be across the entire page, so the entire screen needs to be blue. So let's add the background color. And the background color in this case, here's the hex value. And we might want to just add the hex value right here, but I think what a better idea might be for our case is to create a new folder called scss, and what we can do is create a new file with the name of vars.scss, and you notice there's an underscore in the beginning. What that just means is this is a partial file, and it's going to be included in other Sass files. So we can create a variable with the $sign, and maybe this is our primary dark blue color. So what we'll do is add the color to this variable, and then we want to import that file and use the variable instead of the hard-coded value here. So we can add the import statement like this with the @, and we just need the path for the Sass folder. If we go 2 levels up, we can now import the file, and then we can actually start using that variable. So primary dark, and we don't actually have a size for this div. So we know the width is going to be 100%, and the height will also be 100% because we want the home to be exactly the height of the screen. But what you would notice is nothing really has happened. So if you open the dev console here and go to the elements tab, and we can see we've got our body, root, and then the home page. And what this numbers at the top left say is that it's 696 by 0. So the 0 is actually the height, so it's width times height, and the height is 0. So why is that? Well, our root is also 0, so 100%, which is the home page, is 100% of 0 is still 0. So what we need to do is update our app component to make sure that it spans the entire page, because if you notice in our prototype, the application is the width and height of the screen, and we would assume that this will have its own scroll bar, and if we have any more days here or hours here, it might scroll on its own because this part doesn't really need to scroll. So the easiest way to add that will be to actually wrap this in a div, and what we can do here is add a class name for just called app, and we'll put all the contents of the router inside of the app. And then we can open the app.sass folder, and this is all the stuff from the previous React sample, so we'll just delete all this stuff. And in the app we just need to make it so that the width is 100 VW for view width, and the height will be the same 100 VH for view height. So the view height, the way it works is it takes the height of your screen or the browser window and makes that div equal to the browser width and height. And if we go back now, everything looks fine. The root is the width of the window, and the app is the width of the window, and the home page is 100% of that. So that's basically the exact same. And if we go ahead and open our image again, we can see there's supposed to be two components here. So one is the hello and the user's name, and the next is the search component, so for finding your city. So what we can do is reflect that in this home component. So what we'll do is add a new component inside of the components folder called title. And again, we need to import React from React. That goes for all the files, and we'll export a new function with its own props. And obviously we need to create a new interface. And for this interface, I can think there should be a username. So username will be a string, and that should be all that we need. And this is going to return a new div with a class name. And there's going to be two parts of this. One is the hello, and the other is this underscore. So what we'll do is add a h1 tag for the hello and the on the rest. And this will say hello. For now, we can make it just an underscore portion, so it kind of looks like it, but it may not behave as we want. And then all we need to do is include the title component here. So we can add the title, and it doesn't really need any children, but it does need a username. For now, we can just hard code this. So if we look at the page, it looks pretty bad so far. We need to do some styling changes, and there's a big margin at the top. So if you notice, all these are coming from the browser itself. So it says user agent style sheet, which means Chrome is adding this style to our h1 tag. So what we need to do is actually, we'll go into our scss file and create a new file called base.scss. And in here, what we'll do is target the h1, and we'll try to override all of these here. So display block is fine, font size 2em. I think we want it a little bit larger, so we'll just make it font size maybe 48 pixels. And definitely the font family, we'll make it, let's say, Helvetica. And for the font weight, we will make it 100 because we want it to be nice and modern instead of bold here. And definitely for the margin, for now, let's keep it at 0, and we'll see how best to adjust this. And now the base actually needs to be included in something, so we'll import it into our index file. And that looks pretty good. We forgot to add a color. So what we'll do is, so the color should be, let's just say white for now. And that looks good. So let's go back to our title, and we already have a class name called title. What we can do is add a new file called title.scss, and then we can target the title and make it text aligned center. So we want all the text to be in the center, and we also want it to be a little bit off the top. So if we go back to the image, it's not quite in the middle of the entire page, but it's just maybe 100 pixels or so from the top, or maybe 200. So let's add that. We'll just add a margin, and we'll make it 200 pixels. And what all these other zeros are is basically it's top, right, bottom, left. So it goes clockwise. And let's include this file and import it. So if we go back to our browser, we can see that it created a huge margin at the top, which is what we said. And it actually moved our page, including the background. So that's not quite what we want. So the reason is the difference between margin and padding is very important to know. if you see, the title created a margin which actually pushes the div down, but what we want is space at the top. We don't want the div to push down, we just want space at the top. So that would be padding. So what we can do is change this to padding, and then if we notice, it actually adds the space at the top and leaves the border around the div as it is. So the size of the div does not change, but we get the padding that we want. So if we go ahead and compare our prototype to the application that we're building, it already looks pretty good. In the next video, we'll work on making this part dynamic so that the user can actually type in their name and it'll save, and we'll learn more about that in the next video. Make sure you subscribe so that you can keep up with all the videos that I'm releasing, and make sure you follow along. If you need access to the code, you can find that down below in the description, and see you next time.